Europe and looking a little lost because I was at the beginning of a career change. So this career change eventually led me to become a cross-cultural trainer, and I also worked in executive search, which eventually led me to my role here at IESE. When I moved here 11 years ago, I've been part of the careers team that entire time, basically leading the tech sector, recruitment, and managing the relationships with the tech companies. Now, you might be wondering what's up with the flags. It's simply to show where I'm from, which is the US, and where I've lived and worked so far. And I've had the great fortune of living in some of the world's most dynamic and beautiful cities, from Tokyo as an intern to living in Buenos Aires, where I learned Spanish. And then when I made that leap to Europe, I moved to Paris, and then 2 years later, I moved to London, and now I find myself in Spain. And I have to admit, Spain is my favorite. I think living on the Mediterranean coast is an amazing experience. And Barcelona is just a very livable city in terms of size and has a very interesting culture. So just one more thing to add, because for those of you out there contemplating an international MBA, I recently came across some research that surveyed MBA participants from around the world. And it found that for those that relocated to a new country, they tend to have a better sense of self than those who don't. Now, this is really interesting. You basically learn more about yourself and your home culture. You reflect on your own values once you're outside of your comfort zone and outside the comforts of home. Now, this is important. Why? Because having a better sense of self, more self-awareness, more self-knowledge, it can get you closer to understanding what you want to do in life in terms of your career. And that's why we're here today, right? So we're going to cover 3 topics today. We're going to look at the technology recruitment landscape. We're going to talk about what is technology, what does that mean here at IESE, and then I'll follow up with a few questions that students typically ask. Now, I just wanted to highlight, I did add one word here because we're looking at tech recruitment from an MBA recruitment perspective. And like most MBAs, many students are here because they're looking for a change. Now, perhaps you too are contemplating these big changes, which is pretty normal. In fact, if we look at our students last year, 85% of them successfully changed at least one aspect, whether it was a sector, function, or location, which is great, but it doesn't tell the complete story. Whereas 85% were able to change one aspect, only 20% were able to change all 3. Now, from a tech recruitment perspective, the easiest to change, I would say, is sector, followed by function, and then location. Now, you might ask yourself, why work for a tech company? Now, from these images, it's no surprise to me that students are flocking to tech. If you look at the image on the right side, and you look way back to 2001, 2006, there was only one tech firm represented among the top 5 largest companies by market cap. You fast forward 10 years later, and all 5 are tech giants, and that you'll recognize. So why tech? I would say growth is the #1 reason. Where there is growth, there's opportunity to grow your career. Another reason why students like to work for tech firms is the ability to make an impact. Now, these tech products and services, they're easier to scale up, and they reach a large number of people. Now, these companies like to think big, and they think big about how they can have a wider and positive impact on society, and that's very attractive for students. And finally, I would say corporate culture is key. Here you have companies with less hierarchy, which means more autonomy translates to more freedom for you. And people feel empowered in these companies. Google likes to hire what they call founders to take initiative and just figure it out on their own. There's also this sense of informality. Do you wear a tie to work? Well, say goodbye. There's also this sense of playfulness. I think that companies like Google and Salesforce have this amazing culture at Netflix, and the list goes on. Now, if you look at the image on the left, you will see the world's 20 largest tech giants. And I think the interesting thing to highlight here is that in the top 20, it's a binary world. It's a world full of US companies and growing Chinese companies. I have to say that most of these companies do come on campus in some shape or form. And if they don't, we have had conversations with them. I think, just to highlight, I think the Chinese companies are definitely companies to look out for because some of them have leadership programs that are targeting MBAs, and those that don't are just about to expand internationally and are looking for MBAs to help them do that outside of China. So when we're speaking of companies, how do we look at the tech landscape? And of course, first you can see here the IESE is global, even even if we are a European school. That being said, most of the opportunities that you'll find are naturally based in Europe. Now, I used to divide the tech world into subsectors, looking at which companies focus on software, which companies are devices, and that just got very complicated. And so basically, I divide the companies into size. And here we have the big tech firms. Half of these companies shown here, half of these logos, they have some type of leadership program focused on MBAs. The other focus is on internship hiring when they hire MBAs. And Google is a good example of that, as is King, a gaming company with a local studio here in Barcelona. Now, when it comes to full-time hiring, a vast majority of companies outside the US simply don't target MBAs, meaning an MBA is a nice to have, not a have to have. So it's really important to be prepared for that reality. Opportunities are found directly on their career portals. Now, the next group of companies is high growth. This is what I call the sweet spot for MBAs. This has to do with the size of these companies and their funding. Usually they're beyond Series B and Series C, so they're looking at scaling up their businesses internationally and very quickly. The list also includes some unicorns. Now, why do I say they're sweet? They're not too small, they have funding enough to pay an MBA level salary, and they're not too big. Students can make an impact at these companies, and more importantly, well, they are likely to get hired into roles where they might not have previous experience. So this is really good for career changers. Now, you will see some fintech companies here like N26 and Klarna and Deposit Solutions. There's definitely a fintech story. Fintech is very hot with over 20% of investment in that space. Now, the entrepreneurship ecosystem in Europe, I would say for students, is most vibrant in Germany and Berlin, followed by London, Barcelona, Madrid, and Amsterdam. And finally, if this is a space that resonates with you, I encourage you to go to your search engine, whether it's Google or Baidu, if you're logging in from China, and look up these three words: collaborative, economy, honeycomb. Honeycomb is one word: collaborative, economy, honeycomb. Click on images. You will see version 1, you will see version 3, you will see the complexity of the different subsectors and all the different spaces that these companies, technology is disrupting. We have food tech, travel tech, fintech, health tech, wellness and fitness, and the list goes on. This also shows how difficult it can be for a student to focus. Now, for those of you keen to change geography, I think the high growth type of company is a really good option. As an example, this summer, we have one student from Europe interning in Indonesia for a travel tech company. And last year, we had a woman from China who networked her way into a fintech firm in Barcelona for this summer. Now, I would say if you look at our employment report, you'll see that overall across the different sectors, 60 to 65% of our opportunities are found via what we call our job board. These are jobs that we post for students. And then the other 20 to 25% are mostly found via networking, so that's very important. So finally, we're going to look at the last group here, which are startups. And these are typically early stage startups. They can have less than 10 people, or they can have secured Series A funding and be doubling from 50 to 100 people. Now, mostly these are opportunities students target for internships because many of them do not yet have the funding for a full-time MBA level salary. Now, startups can be great for career changers who want to gain experience in a new function. So how do you find them once you're on campus? We have on-campus events. And you will meet some startups and founders in your classes, and you will learn about them in your cases, and you will get to meet them in person during some of the treks that we have. Also, alumni are key here, as they usually hire exclusively from ESA for the internships. In terms of top recruiting country, it's not a surprise that Spain is at the top, and this in part is because you're here already, you're studying in Barcelona, but also because work authorization is guaranteed for the summer for all students wherever you are from. So if we take a close look at what types of roles exist, you're going to ask yourself, where do I fit? Well, first of all, 1/3 of the full-time offers pretty much are made up of MBA leadership programs. And these are great because you can rotate from one role to another, or you're rotating from one business unit to another. But other programs hire you into a permanent position. And if this can vary by company and it can vary by region. But what if you don't land a leadership program? Then you have to start thinking about a specific function. Why it's important to think about it that way. So some roles This is not a comprehensive list, but some roles are easier to change without experience, but not always. Depending on the company, I find that sales and business development might be one of those, whereas marketing, especially with the larger companies, and you can think about the big tech brands, the larger the company, the more previous experience is required. Now, also for those of you interested in the big tech brands and are looking at Europe, you're mostly looking at a local subsidiary, not headquarters. So most of the workforce is made up of revenue-generating salespeople. So you will see a lot of the job board filled with sales and business development roles. But there are other roles out there, and product management is one of them that's gained in popularity. And depending on the business model, some companies would require you to have a technical background, such as Google, while others, a business background would be enough. Another thing to point out about product management is that they tend to be located, most of those roles are located at headquarters. So if you want to stay in Europe, I recommend looking at European companies. Now, operations and logistics is a really interesting area, especially important with any of these e-commerce companies. Any company that has a delivery business, the shipping of goods, transportation, operations will be at the heart of the business. We also see a few finance and corporate development roles, but not in huge numbers, that are targeting MBAs. And then finally, anything with digital, whether it's digital strategy, digital transformation. In fact, digital leaders are needed across sectors. So with technology as an enabler for disruption, you can even have a tech-related role without necessarily working for a tech company. You can have a digital transformation role in a consumer goods company or an insurance company. Now, what type of profile do these tech companies prefer? Well, first, this is typically what companies do ask for. Of course, it depends on the company and opportunity, but first, having a global outlook is very important, especially for working with teams across these different time zones, is often the case with these multinationals. Now, the next two are probably the ones that I see most, and being data-driven. Companies are asking for this more and more. In fact, I'm thinking about one of our recent grads who got hired into a role at Microsoft recently, and she just updated her LinkedIn profile, and her title is Data and AI Product Marketing Manager. So I think the title says it all. And if you haven't heard it yet, you'll hear it over and over again. Data is the new oil of the digital economy. Recruiters, value the MBA toolkit for the problem solving and analytical abilities that students bring and learn while they're in the program. Learning agility is another one that we see a lot as a top value for companies. And different companies call it different things, but it's essentially the same thing. Google calls it cognitive ability. Microsoft says having a growth mindset is important. At Amazon, it's learn and be curious. Basically, there's constant learning required in these companies that are changing so quickly, where your skills have to be upgraded. So I think the tech sector is really good for people who have a hunger to improve themselves. Comfort with ambiguity, this we see as well. You might even be asked in an interview, tell me about a time when you had to deal with ambiguity. And this is because change is so prevalent. I can recall recent grads talking about how everyone that they interviewed with, including their boss-to-be, had moved on to a new role, right? Or teams get created and dismantled all the time at these companies. Now that's ambiguity. Having an entrepreneurial mindset. We met with one of these Chinese unicorns last month, and the recruiter was telling us that no processes had been established and they constantly had to create things from scratch. So if you have an entrepreneurial mindset, you're more likely to be able also to deal with ambiguity, right? So these kind of are linked. You can roll up your sleeves and get things done. And finally, one of our alumni working for Amazon recently brought this up about the importance of not being afraid to fail and, of course, learning from the mistake. So we're going to continue to look at technology at ESA and what that means. Okay? So I just want you to meet the team here. I work with Pilar Las Heras, and we're responsible for working with the companies, bringing them on campus, posting all of the jobs, and then we have a few clubs that are tech related, but the one I'm going to focus on is the tech club. Half the students are members of this club. And Jesse Glass is leading it for this upcoming year. He's from the US. He has a team of 18 people, and he has done a really good job putting together a recruitment guide that we can prepare students for the various interviews that they have with companies. Now on his team he has Morgan, and what Morgan's responsible for is looking at the type of master classes education that would complement students' academics. be talking about that in a second. Then you have Laura, who's looking at events, and it's mainly on-campus events, but it's also looking at the different treks that the Tech Club runs. And then finally, we have Fareed, who's looking at recruitment, and he's working with different people who will be leading sessions for students who will be interviewing with the different companies. So if it's Google, he will organize a Google panel of interns. We have an Amazon Academy. Over the years, we've developed a lot of material to help prepare students for the interviews that they have with these companies. So he will be looking at that company by company with the different students on the team. Now, when you look at the tech-related academics that we have, the first year is made up of required classes, but in your second year, you'll have an opportunity to choose your electives. And this is just a sample of what you might see that you can choose from. Classes from digital commerce and internet enabling strategies to the rise of fintech. And then what I mentioned before, what the Tech Club does is they complement that with master classes that we see that students, the skills that are required for the types of jobs that tech companies have. And SQL is one that recruiters are increasingly asking for. So we started an SQL master class 2 years ago, which is very popular. And some of the other master classes that will be run this year include agile methodologies. I talked about product management becoming increasingly popular, but there will also be master classes on AI, VR, and AR, and video games. So now when it comes to events on campus with companies, our flagship event is the ESA Career Forum, which is held in October, 3 days in October and 2 days in February. This is an event that brings over 70 companies over those 2 events. And this is across sectors, so you will be looking at companies from consulting and banking, consumer goods, healthcare, energy. But then here are some logos of the companies that participated in the last year. Then we have events that are regionally focused. And this year we will be having again the LATAM Career Fair in conjunction with LBS and INSEAD, and it will take place in October. And then we have the Asia Career Fair, which we've been hosting now for 2 years in a row. This is the 7th year that it's been happening with the 4 top European business schools, and it will take place in November. And then in the springtime, we have other events. We have a more exclusive event that will take place in Singapore called the Asia Career Summit, where typically 20 to 30 students participate, meeting companies, having coffee chats with them, even visiting companies as well. And then we have the ESA Startup Fair, which takes place in the spring, where mostly local startups come from Barcelona to meet with students to look at internship opportunities. And here you have a bunch of us on a trek. I'm hidden in that picture, maybe on purpose. And it really, I think, captures the mood of these treks. The purpose of the treks is to learn about the companies, the opportunities that they have, what it's like to work there, what a typical day is like, what the challenges are. And there are 20 treks covering all the different sectors here. But the ones that are focused on tech, the Tech Club runs is the tech trek to London, and then there's one to Dublin, and a new one this year is Madrid. We've been visiting the Amazon Fulfillment Center these past few years in Madrid, and now recently they've opened a fulfillment center in Barcelona, so it's right next door, so we visit that. And then some of the other clubs that are tech-related as well have their own trek. So FinTech is one of them. They started a new trek to London just last year. And then the Entrepreneurship Club has been running a trek taking students to Silicon Valley. So ESA Meets the Valley has been running since 2012, where students get to meet the local entrepreneurship ecosystem there. And then some European-based events as well, meeting with startups in Berlin and startups in Barcelona. And of course, these regional treks, like in the photo here, we're in some desert outside of Dubai. They're not tech-focused. You'll be seeing companies across the different sectors, but we have them for Dubai, for Mexico, and for China. Finally, I want to cover some of the typical questions that students ask about when they're thinking about working in tech. So what if I don't have a tech background? Okay, so this is not a problem at all. Tech companies are very much open to those coming with different backgrounds, although some backgrounds are easier than others. So if you come from management consulting, there are no guarantees, but you will likely have an easier time landing interviews. Now, we have quite a few examples of students who made the change from what we call untraditional backgrounds, whether you're somebody with a military background. I'm thinking of somebody this year, somebody who's an architect who is interning this summer for Facebook in London. You can see this picture here. We have 3 Nooglers from last summer. and they're in Dublin. And Mauricio from Brazil, he is not somebody who came from tech. He came, in fact, from a very heavy industry, from mining, but he was able to leverage his previous functional experience, procurement planning. Who would have thought? So Google invited him for interviews, and he landed that internship there. Now, I just want to reiterate that point I made before, that change may take an additional step after graduation to land exactly what you're looking for, especially for those with a niche background. And I can think to one recent example, somebody, for example, a journalist who was a journalist prior to the MBA. He even had a tech internship with a big tech firm in his home country, but he struggled in the full-time search. But eventually he landed an opportunity with a boutique consulting firm after the MBA, even though he was targeting tech. But then he was able to eventually pivot and land a job with one of the giant e-commerce players in his home country. So a perfect example of how it might take more than one step. Also, as a way to move to tech, you may consider leveraging your functional expertise as a way to get started. So if you have a finance background, it would be easier for you to break into tech by leveraging that experience you have gained. Okay, so moving on to work permits. Okay, this is a common question. I wish I had a simple answer, but it depends on so many factors. To simplify, I'll start with the internship search. As I said before, in Spain, you automatically have work authorization for the summer wherever you're from, since your summer project is considered part of the academic program. Now, outside of Spain, companies that target MBAs for internships in Europe, it depends. Some sponsor students and others require students to have the authorization already. When it's a leadership program specific for MBAs, usually a company will do the sponsorship, but that's not always the case. Another factor is time. Can you be hired in time for the visa to be processed for your summer internship? Now, with companies that hire on a project needs basis, they can be hiring at the last minute. So you might run out of time. So it's a tricky situation. And of course, there are many factors. Politics can play a role here, and elections can influence a country's stance on work permit, as we've seen more recently in places like Singapore. Now, I've talked about the internship. Of course, for the full-time, it also depends. And I sometimes think it might be tougher with larger, well-established companies to sponsor people where HR has to go through a large legal team, whereas a high-growth company that is nimble and not all the processes are in place might be more open, especially if the founder of the company has an MBA. Also, I have seen companies do work authorization for people who are a perfect fit functionally and they're just changing location. So they're willing to do the sponsorship for that type of person when you have the skill set that they have a hard time finding locally. So work permits, as I mentioned, in the end are greatly influenced by a lot of factors, including macroeconomics. So I talked about networking before. Is it important in the tech sector? And just to clarify what we mean by networking here, it's not asking someone for a job, but asking for advice and insights from people as a way to learn about what they do, what their companies do, what the trends are, and this can lead to learning, especially about a particular sector, and it also helps to fine-tune what it is that you're looking for in terms of your future career. Now, many tech firms, big and small, don't necessarily have established recruiting processes specific to MBAs. Therefore, the point of entry is not always straightforward. So networking can help to unlock some of that hidden market, these opportunities that are not advertised. So of course, yes, it is important from a career management perspective, and we would say it's never too early to get started even before the MBA, especially if you're one of those aiming for the triple jump. Now, if you're someone without a lot of experience with networking or feel uncomfortable about it, I can recommend one resource for you, a method that we use here on campus and recommended during the MBA. It's developed by Steve Dalton, a career advisor from the US, from the Fuqua School of Business. His book, The 2-Hour Job Search, of course, can be bought online. You can take a look at it. That's The 2-Hour Job Search by Steve Dalton. And finally, what can I do to prepare before I start my MBA? Of course, aside from networking, I guess our professors would like me to say reading the Financial Times is a good start, the online version, of course. But I would say start with some industry research. It could be TechCrunch. It could be going to the CB Insights website. They have a newsletter you can sign up for. If you're looking to find out what the local scene is like for startups, there's a website called barcino.com. That's BARCINNO.com. barcino.com, and then you may even consider doing a pre-MBA internship if you have that luxury. And I was impressed with one of our admitted students I met recently coming from an FMCG background. She decided to work for a VC for a few months prior to the MBA. This is a great way to gain insight, see if you like a particular company, function, and it's just a good way to experiment with low risk. And finally, I recommend that you optimize your LinkedIn profile. Start building your network on LinkedIn before you need it the most. It's never too soon to start. So finally, this concludes our Career Services Insider Series. If you're interested in the other 3 webinars that have taken place already, but you hadn't registered for them, you can send an email to mbainfo@esa.edu to look at the other 3, the entrepreneurship one, the finance one, or the consulting one. And of course, if you have any questions for me, you can just drop me an email at vlambiri@esa.edu. Thank you very much.